The West Erie Plaza. Located just outside of the city limits. This shopping mecca has been home to thousands of shoppers for over 70 years. But where did it all begin? Let's take a closer look at the West Erie Plaza. Tonight, on Project Algerine. It's 1878, and William E McNair has just sold his farm to the industrious railroad tycoon William L. Scott. The property borders West 8th Street to the north, West 12th Street to the south, and Pittsburgh Avenue to the east. The McNair Farm was well maintained and professionally operated for several decades. On June 24, 1893, David Berger was attempting to repair the roof on the barn at the McNair Farm. The sun took its toll on the poor 70-year-old David, and he then fell 25 feet, fracturing his hip and sustaining other injuries. 2 weeks later, David Berger died from his injuries. He is buried in Erie Cemetery. After the death of William Scott, the farm was eventually left to his granddaughter, Matild Townsend Wells. Matild was the eccentric wife of Sumner Wells, who was the Secretary of State for Franklin Roosevelt. At the time, Matild's claim to fame was blowing much of her family's inheritance on Catherine the Great's jewels and tiara. Matild eventually sold the farm property in 1949, just 2 months before passing away unexpectedly in Switzerland. On May 5, 1949, the West Erie Plaza Corporation officially registered in the state of Pennsylvania. And on August 12, the news of the new shopping plaza was released to the public. The West Erie Plaza would contain a world-class movie theater, restaurants, and retail shops built by local construction companies. Work would begin immediately on Phase 1 of the project, which consisted of the theater and a few storefronts. On December 15, 1950, Dipson Theatre opened to a packed house. It was one of the largest theatres in its day, and could seat over 1,300 patrons per showing. The theatre, decked out in true 1950s fashion, featured marble walls and tapestries. Mirrors, in the ladies' restroom, were tinted a slight peach color. This, along with the lighting, made everyone look like a celebrity. This movie palace boasted a large formal staircase to the mezzanine and the first fireproof projection booth. Some of the stores to open during Phase 1 construction were Brown & Jones Drugs, the Winter Company, and First National Bank. The popularity of the new shops and theater, Phase 2 construction on the plaza was started right away. But not before redirecting Cascade Creek, which ran directly through the site of the future stores. After the successful diversion of Cascade Creek, to run parallel to Pittsburgh Avenue, Phase 2 of the project moved forward quickly. This was the third known time in history that Cascade Creek has been altered through this area. The first was around 1833. To this day, you can still see the dip in the parking lot where Cascade Creek originally ran, directly through the middle. The McNair barn sat just on the other side of the creek, replaced now by a lamp post. Ironically, the pole is roughly 25 feet high. Marking the approximate height and location where David Berger fell 127 years ago. The West Erie Plaza continued to grow quickly in those early years. New stores seemed to be opening almost constantly. The G.C. Murphy Company opened in 1955. Murphy's was a Pittsburgh-based five and dime store selling practically everything you could imagine from gold earrings to goldfish. Murphy's was probably best known for its lunch counter. The Halle Brothers Company was a Cleveland-based department store that opened here in 1955, and then expanded the building in 1968. They specialized in higher-end clothing, for both men and women. Loblaws, a Canadian-based grocery store chain, opened here in 1962. Loblaws was known at the time for its fresh fruits and vegetables. They had several stores in the Erie vicinity at the time. The Loblaws chain eventually left the United States, but is still in operation in the Toronto area today. The Boston store opened in the West Erie Plaza in 1968. Founded in Erie in 1885, the Boston store was eventually bought by the Joseph B. Horn Company of Pittsburgh. All the Plaza's stores remained full for some time. Vacancies were usually snatched up quickly. At one point, the West Erie Plaza was considered one of the largest shopping plazas in the country. But that was all about to change. On March 6, 1972, the first shot was fired, in a retail war, for your dollars and attention span. Just a short distance away, developers were planning a new kind of retail establishment, to lure away shoppers from the plazas, along with their wallets. On November 10, 1975, the Mill Creek Mall opened to the public. One of the first indoor malls of its kind in the country. This massive structure featured over 100 stores, and contained a 3-screen movie theater. For the first time, people could wander between stores, without fear of the weather. This was especially attractive to the citizens of Erie, where temperatures in February can reach below zero. The new competition from the Mill Creek Mall wasn't the only bad news for the West Erie Plaza that year. The Pennsylvania Department of Transportation launched an initiative to extend Interstate 79 north, from 26th Street to 12th. The state's plan was to relocate 200 families from the Delaware Place housing development, and replace them with a high-speed corridor to the interstate highway system. This proposed highway interchange would be located just east of the West Erie Plaza. The project would force many businesses to close that were in its path, along West 12th Street. When it was finished, it had the opposite effect as intended. Instead of bringing more people from the south of the railroad tracks to the plaza, the highway served as an expressway to the newer Mill Creek Mall for the people living north of the tracks, thus accelerating the deterioration of the West Erie Plaza towards the end of the last century. The plaza started going through a really weird period. An attempt to reinvent itself in the 1980s was made by remodeling the original massive movie palace into 4 separate smaller screens. Many believe this destroyed much of the original charm of the theater. Art installations were placed in front of several stores, such as the Moving Rock, a mirror reflection sculpture, and the Good Time Clock, seen here. It was the last time any money was invested in the property for the next 30 years. Due to declining ticket sales and growing maintenance costs, the Plaza Theatre closed at the end of December 2008. Its final showing was the film, Yes Man, starring Jim Carrey. Nobody knew if the theater would ever open again. On May 6, 2012, it was announced that a local investment group purchased the plaza property from a then out-of-state owner, with plans to redevelop the site and possibly find a new tenant for the theater. It was the first positive news about the plaza in quite some time. Then came the challenge to the developers. How do you modernize a more than a half-century-old shopping plaza for today's consumer? The buildings back then were long and narrow. This is because the shops in the 1950s needed more room to hold their inventory. This isn't the case anymore, and retailers today want wider, more shallow buildings with larger window frontage. In 2013, the first order of business was a new facade for the last two remaining storefronts. Although it wasn't known by the public at the time, this new facade was really only temporary. In the spring of 2015, demolition began on the north end of the plaza. Ironically, this is the first section of the plaza built way back in 1950. There were no wrecking balls on this job site. This demolition was carried out with the utmost precision. The theater remained vacant, while demolition on the rest of the site progressed throughout 2015. The Boston Store's old building was completely torn down and removed from the site. The buildings were gutted, down to their frames, and a courtyard was cut into the middle section of the plaza, allowing for more retail space around it. As the plaza's future was starting to take shape, news broke about the future of the plaza's theater. After a multi-year exhaustive search to find a new tenant, along with the cost of remodeling and updating the now dilapidated theater, it was determined it would be cost prohibitive. Dipson's theater would be torn down in the spring of 2016. Construction on the West Erie Plaza continued throughout the summer of 2016. New concrete walkways were poured, along with new trees and landscaping. LED lighting was also added to the parking lot. A large metal archway hangs over the center courtyard, which lights up each night. By 2018, the West Erie Plaza had more new retail stores in it than it's had in the past 20 years. Visitors to the West Erie Plaza now enjoy high-end retail shopping, along with world-class dining. At the end of 2020, the West Erie Plaza is now almost completely filled. This has been the West Erie Plaza on Project Algerine.